and experience. The environmental and social assessment would have two complementary studies. One would be a regional environmental and social assessment, would look at the large picture. The other would be a more project-specific assessment that it would look at the detailed issues. So one would look much more at the strategy, broader impacts, broader risks, broader opportunities, and the other would look at questions like, where do you site, from an environmental perspective, a hydropower facility or a desalinization facility, or the best alignment for a pipeline to avoid archaeological sites or to avoid agricultural areas, this type of thing. And having these two different scales very much helps looking at the bigger picture as well as a very detailed picture that one needs. And the environmental and social safeguard policies of the World Bank would be used as the reference point, since we've got those as a globally recognized standard. One of the questions brought up would be the analysis of alternatives. And as said in the terms of reference, there would be an examination of no action. What happens if nothing is done? There would also be an evaluation of the options that have already been proposed, studied, or being undertaken, because there are ongoing studies right now also. Then there would be this question of the option of increasing Jordan flows into the Dead Sea, looking at the various demands which exist and plans and constraints. Issues to be addressed. Clearly, because this includes a large area which is very diverse, one would need to look at issues at the Gulf of Aqaba, one would need to look at the impacts on the coral reef, and also at the urban area there. The whole question of what happens in the Wadi Araba. Ecologically, this is a very ecologically sensitive area. It's a major flyway. It has many unique species. What about the impacts on the Dead Sea region? What about this mixing of the Red Sea and Dead Sea waters? Impacts on groundwater, positive, negative. What about archaeological, historical, cultural heritage sites? So it would have to be a detailed survey. What about these hydropower facilities and the desalinization? For example, disposal of the brine for the desalinization. Induced impacts, that means if you expand tourism, for example, what happens with expanded tourism from having more water and electricity available? That would be an induced impact. What about risks from the construction period? You'll have a large construction crew. HIV/AIDS risks are something the World Bank has examined in all programs, despite where they might be anywhere in the world. We need this looked at. What about impacts from special risk? Like, for example, the area is very seismically active. What kinds of risks would there be from an earthquake which could break the conveyance? And then cumulative impacts. What happens when you put all these impacts together? Are there things which become very complicated? Public consultation and disclosure would not just be done at this point. As draft studies would be prepared, there would be more consultations. These would be put out. There would be executive summaries in Arabic and in Hebrew and in English for use by the general audience. The more detailed studies would be in English. And we would continue, just like today, to have active involvement of representatives and beneficiary parties in these meetings, since they are, in fact, the leaders. You heard about the study program. Basically, this is the study implementation arrangements. You can see here the Palestinian Authority, Jordan, and Israel are all equal partners. They all have representatives of this technical steering committee. And then the World Bank is acting as the party which will contract the consultants and coordinate their work under the supervision of this technical steering committee. There'll also be an independent panel of experts drawn internationally to review the studies and to comment on them, so that we're getting, again, additional independent views on this. They will be appointed and report to the Technical Steering Committee. The findings of their reviews would also be made public on the website. In terms of the timeline for the study, There would be a 24-month process. Phase 1, which we would anticipate would start December of this year, would be 4 months. It would review the existing studies, identify gaps in knowledge, and then where there are gaps in Phase 2, one would do original work to collect more information. They would generate a preliminary draft report on the feasibility study, on the environmental and social assessment, on these 4 geographic studies which would be put out. And then at the end of that 15-month period, we'd move into a Phase 3 for 5 months, generate the final draft and final reports. Again, the final draft would be made publicly available for comment, just like the draft report. And then the documentation would go on to a general discussion with the governments, with the public, with potential financiers, public and private sector, as to whether this made sense to do or not, or a combination of things made sense to do. Right now, there is an ongoing procurement process to obtain the consultants. This is being done under the supervision of the World Bank using our policies, but it's a competitive process. The objective is to get the best qualified firms and get it done in a cost-effective way. The firms will be using international, regional, and national experts on their teams. This is not a study being done by a group of foreigners from outside the region, but we want to get international expertise to get the benefit of that, as well as the regional and local expertise, so that we get the strengths of all those different views and types of experience. So the estimated timeline right now, as you heard earlier, a short list has been determined for the firms to undertake the studies. Right now we're having public stakeholder meetings to discuss the terms of reference. Mid-September, after the public stakeholder meetings are determined, we've finished, we'll have a steering committee meeting. We'll discuss the comments. We'll make decisions as to how to respond to those, how they may affect the study program, and then requests will be put out to the shortlisted firms to prepare their detailed proposals. And then following negotiation with the firms that have the best proposals, the studies would commence in December 2007. In terms of this process, we do have consultations, as I've said today, here in Ramallah and in Jericho. We have a comment period that runs until September 2nd, and in addition to the comments we would hear today, comments can be sent either by telefax or electronically to the addresses here, to our colleague Alex McPhail, who will be joining us later. With that, I'd like to stop the presentation and to open the floor to questions and particularly to hear your comments and views. And this will be moderated by our colleague from the Ministry of Planning here of the Palestinian Authority. Thank you very much.